don't, but I think we should. I think we should double check it because it's, in a sense, it's slightly less clear cut than some of the other issues. The really key issue for me is about determining whatever organisation takes this on is very clear that they're taking on responsibility for Healthwatch, not just, if you like, carrying on doing what they normally do. And it's really interesting talking to the Healthwatch team in the LGA. The thing that they're most focused on at the moment is the kind of market development process. Because it's like any procurement, is it looks fantastic. Oh, let's go out, let's throw this open to the market. And then you find actually you may not have a market.
We had 9 organisations who looked at the advert on Ozio and not one of them applied for it. So.
Because I think because the model you're looking at was certainly a model that came up in discussion we had in the Northwest with Andrew Larcher and Casey Chan, which Tameside came to. Yeah. And the model that Tameside is also being looked at by another local authority area as well. I think the issue was around if it shared the same chief executive, because it would have its own board and be financially kind of responsible itself. But it was that kind of sharing that was it was that whole kind of the independence issue. Yeah.
Sorry, perhaps I'm not up to speed here. I don't understand how you can do that because you talk about independence. Yeah. Is that not contradictory?
I think it's about setting up because within a third sector infrastructure organisation, similar to yours, within the M&Arts, they do have the ability to actually set up subsidiary organisations. And usually what happens is the idea is it's like a project gets nurtured, and then once it's established, it would kind of float off. Yeah. And I think that's the idea. In other words, I think the idea is to give the new kind of Healthwatch organisation some initial kind of support until it can actually develop its resources.
And I think my question, if you hadn't asked that question was, when you say independence, do you actually mean separate, new and separate, or that? Because not necessarily the same thing, are they? Because then you work in, because there was this, until the amendment came through, there was this idea that certain things could happen, but we then talked about subsidiary of an existing infrastructure organisation. I just need to clarify this in terms of what is able and what isn't. I mean, the model I presumably interpreted is that the new Healthwatch would be a completely separate organisation with its own board, and not only would it be new, it would be separate, it would be independent. And I'm not quite sure. But if you're actually saying you cannot be a subsidiary, that's a different,
You're right. It's important to tease it out, which is why I say we'll go back and we'll absolutely check it out. For me, the key independence means independent of the bodies which are where the public voice needs to impact. So they need to be independent of the local authority, of the NHS, or of NHS suppliers.
Yes.
Yeah. So otherwise you can't actually stand back and be critical. Or the theory is if you can't stand back and be critical.
We are aware of that apparent dichotomy at the same time, that Healthwatch will be funded by the council and has to sit as an independent body, so this does seem a somewhat conflict of interest there. And we're very aware that we have to sort of work around that possibly.
Yeah.
Sorry, but because it's fundamentally important.
Yeah, it's really, really important. Yeah.
Because again, the interpretation that was floating around a couple of months ago was that an infrastructure, let's say an infrastructure organisation, could actually become ostensibly take on the role of Healthwatch.
Yeah.
It was then thought, no, you need to give independence, and therefore you need a separate governing body. And it's this grey area about whether it's a subsidiary, I'm not sure. As long as we could dispense with the idea that, say, as an infrastructure organisation, we could simply become Healthwatch.
Yeah.
That's not on anymore. And I think that's the case, and I think it's this grey area of the subsidiarity that obviously needs to be teased out, but at least we can confirm that one. That it's this separate organisation. That's, as I said, that's...
I think it seems to be, doesn't it, that it has to have its own board, its own governance, and it has to be financially accountable itself. It's not financially accountable through the kind of parent organisation. It has its own financial accountability. It's just sort of, it's kind of seen as a way of, I think, supporting it to kind of...
And that's why I'm unpicking it. Because I think you're right, you need to be pretty precise. So it's got to be independent of the bodies that it's it can criticise.
Right.
Fundamentally.
Okay.
Second thing,
okay.
It needs to have an independent board.
Yeah.
So the governance of the organisation does need to be separate, and we're thinking through the whole implications of making sure that that's as representative of the public. The third bit is then you get into the very practical issues like the officers. And that's always a challenge in these lean days, is if the possibility is that you could have a chief executive who's really high calibre, would make a great job of it, but is part of a separate organisation, I think we need to go away and think about
I think that certainly was the issue that came out of the conversation with Andrew Larter and Casey Chand was actually if the chief executive of the kind of parent organisation spent 2 days a week being chief executive of the Healthwatch organisation, and that was the bit that was very kind of grey and could potentially cause kind of conflict.
So I think we need to go back and have another go at that.
Whilst you're on independence, can I
Sure.
You spoke about the transition to Healthwatch being accountable to the Health Wellbeing Board. Are you suggesting that continues after Healthwatch is actually...
No.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely not, because it comes back to the same point about...
Well, that's really expenditure.
Same point, no.
So the question then, who then would it be accountable to?
Well, it's accountable to the Healthwatch Board.
Right. Interesting.
Okay. And very important. The reason that we in the LGA are suggesting that doing the transition and the commissioning phase is that there's a very strong link into the Health and Wellbeing Board, is to make sure that the profile is raised, so that it's not a kind of candidly a subsidiary activity, is its core to the way that the NHS and local government do their business. Once you've let the contract, it's for the Healthwatch, for the board of the Healthwatch organisation to be accountable and to be accountable